Okay. Good evening. My name is James Lambert. I'd like to welcome everyone here this evening and those of you that are watching us on the live stream. I am the board chair for the Salina Area Chamber of Commerce, and I'm one of the co-moderators for this evening's Candidates Forum. The forum is sponsored by the Salina Area Chamber of Commerce and the League of Women's Voters. It features candidates from the Kansas House of Representatives 69th District. Printed profiles by the Chamber on all the candidates can be found at the Chamber office, on the Chamber's website at www.salinakansas.org, the County Clerk's Office, the Salina Public Library, and the candidates also completed questionnaires for the Salina League of Women's Voters. Those are available at the League's website, which is www.lwbsalina.org. This forum by the Salina Media Connection is recorded by Smoky Hill Public Television and is being recorded for future viewings. We'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight, the candidates, the media members, and for those of you who have observed our safety protocols because of all the conditions going on with COVID-19. We appreciate that very much. We would like to thank the Salina Community Theater for allowing us to utilize their space and their technical assistance this evening. Our candidates in the first session tonight are Brian Holmquist and Clark Sanders from the 69th District. At this time, I'd like to introduce my co-moderator, Amy Adams from the Salina League of Women's Voters. And Amy's going to review your formats for the rules for tonight's forum. Thank you, Amy.
Good evening. I'm going to quickly review the format of rules. Each candidate will start with a 1-minute opening remark. We will alternate questions between the candidates. We will start out with a section of questions from our media panel, and then we will move into a section of questions submitted by the public. Candidates will have 1 minute to answer questions. The candidates will also offer 1-minute closing remarks. At this time, we'll move on to the candidates' opening remarks. Let's start with Mr. Holmquist.
Good evening. I'm Ryan Holmquist. I'm a 5th-generation Kansan, and I'm a farmer and rancher. My family is still on the original homestead that we've had in the family in Saline County for 152 years. I have degrees from Bethany College and KU, and I have been the choir teacher at Salina Central High School for the past 13 years. I'm running because for too long, working families have worked their jobs and tried to raise their kids, pay bills, and barely get by, when at the same time, corporations and billionaires receive tax cuts and breaks. We have to prioritize working families in Topeka and do so by eliminating the sales tax on groceries, expanding Medicaid, reducing cost of child care, and maintaining constitutional public school funding. Thank you.
And now for opening comments from Mr. Sanders.
My name is Clark Sanders. I'm the Republican running for House District 69. I've been in Salina since 1985. Even when I took a brief hiatus working in South Dakota, I maintained my residence in Salina. So I've been on the radio for 34 out of the last 35 years here in Salina. Recently semi-retired this past April. I'm conservative. I'm 100% pro-life. I'm endorsed by the Kansans for Life PAC. I'm 100% pro-Second Amendment. I'm endorsed by the NRA of Kansas with their highest rating for a non-incumbent. I'm pro-deregulation. I'm 100% in favor of letting local governments decide things that affect their citizenry. And I'm pro-President Trump. Now, if these are things that are important to you.
Stop. Sorry.
Thank you, candidates. At this time, I'd like to introduce the media panel for their questions that they'd like to pose to the candidates. First, I have Paul Kirkwood from Salina Media Connection. Mr. Todd Pittenger from Rockingham Radio. and Mr. Charles Rankin from the Salina Journal. With that, gentlemen, here at this time, you can ask your questions. Who would like to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. I thank candidates for being here, and having an honest and open discussion with the populace. My first question is, if state legislators do not, like ordinances, city and county commissioners establish, if there's a conflict, are you supportive of legislation maintaining or overruling local ordinances?
Whichever one of you wants to go first.
I support home rule for communities, and I think that our local officials are perfectly capable of making decisions for their communities.
Answer to your question is absolutely not. I agree with Ryan on this. Local entities of government, even when I don't agree with them, are the people who should be making the decisions for their local people. And I mean, I think it was just today I heard Governor Kelly talking about wanting to have a statewide mask mandate. That's absolutely the wrong approach. This one-size-fits-all approach that she's advocated until the legislature was able to establish a groundwork for not letting her do whatever the heck she wanted was a good thing. But I'm 100% in favor of home rule.
Thank you both. Next question, please.
We're in the midst of the 7th month of the COVID pandemic. The very latest data from the Kansas Department of Health and Environment in terms of new cases and percent positive test rates continue to suggest community spread is still prevalent, especially now in rural Kansas. How would you assess the state's response to the pandemic so far? Has the state did enough, not done enough, or they have done what about they should be doing? What's your assessment of the state's response to the pandemic?
The state tried to lock local communities down. That was not the proper response. Everybody has agreed from the beginning that what we need is a vaccine and what we need is a therapeutic, and President Trump is working very hard to get those two things done. I think by all accounts, if not by the end of November, by the end of the year, we'll have a vaccine, which will go a long way toward solving the problem. We also are well on the way to having a therapeutic. The state's role, the state's been given a lot of money from the federal government, and the state's role should be to distribute that money as equitably and as quickly as possible.
The state's response thus far has been somewhat mixed. I was not super in favor of some of the early things that were adopted by the governor, but I did appreciate the fact that the statewide mask mandate at least was left up to city and county officials throughout the state, and that they were able to decide for themselves. So our county commissioners and city commissioners made their own decisions here in Salina. There is some funding that needs to be distributed amongst cities and counties to help with COVID response. We need to make sure that the Labor Department has proper technology to process unemployment claims. That has been an issue, and that's something that I will work very hard on in Topeka.
Thank you. Next question, please.
In the midst of this pandemic, healthcare is a really important issue for Kansas. Oklahoma and Missouri voters this year voted to expand Medicaid, so all 4 surrounding states by the end of next year will have expanded Medicaid. What are your thoughts on the topic of expanding Medicaid in Kansas, and how do you think that healthcare can be improved by it?
Mr. Holmquist.
I absolutely support Medicaid expansion. Working Kansans who struggle with entry-level jobs that provide no health insurance need access to affordable health care so that we can have a healthy, strong workforce, and our economy needs a healthy workforce to thrive. And my opponent, like Sam Brownback, does not support Medicaid expansion. We have to do everything that we can, along with, by the way, with our previous question to the coronavirus response, expanding Medicaid will allow people who need immediate health care and the ability to have health insurance and to give.
Mr. Sanders.
I do not support Medicaid expansion. It's too expensive. We can't afford it. I don't know how Mr. Holmquist would propose to pay for it, but we simply can't afford it. Medicaid expansion, to break it down to its most common denominator, is an expansion of Obamacare, which is something we do not need to expand. We need to replace and repeal Obamacare. And I was a little bit flabbergasted to read on Ryan's Facebook page the other day that I'm supposedly somehow opposed to pre-existing conditions not being covered. I think he said that I'm in favor of allowing insurance companies to kick people off pre-existing conditions. That's awfully strange, seeing as I'm a guy who is married to a woman for 40 years who had a bout with cancer 24 years ago. And so we need to cover pre-existing conditions.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Would you support the formation of a non-partisan district reorganizing committee rather than gerrymandering new districts in the upcoming legislative session?
Mr. Sanders.
The legislature failed miserably 10 years ago in the issue of redistricting. They couldn't get it done, and it ended up being decided by the courts. No, I do not favor a commission for that. The Kansas Constitution stipulates that the job of redistricting falls to the Kansas legislature, and it ought to be the Kansas legislature who are making these decisions. And we need to work together to come up with a fair and equitable way to do this. I'm not opposed to looking at computer models to figure out what is fair and right, but this is not for a commission, this is for the Kansas legislature.
Mr. Holmquist.
May I remind my opponent that pre-existing condition coverage is part of the Affordable Care Act, which you just said you would like to repeal. So what I am hearing is that would remove protections for people with pre-existing conditions. Okay. With regard to the current question, I would definitely support an independent redistricting commission because, as we saw in 2010, partisan bickering between two factions of the Republican Party led to the federal courts drawing our boundaries 2 days before the candidate filing deadline. And it's also important that Salina not be split into 3 or 4 districts so that we can maximize our impact in Topeka.
Thank you, Mr. Holmquist. Next question, please.
With the pandemic, a lot of people are out of work, a lot of people looking for jobs. Initially, at the national level, there was some help for the unemployed. That expired in July. The two sides have not been able to come together for another package. So the state is offering a little bit of assistance right now to the unemployed. How should the state help unemployed candidates? Should we offer them more? Are we doing enough? What should the state do to help those unemployed in Kansas in lieu of the federal government having a package?
Mr. Holmquist.
The first thing that I would advocate for are tax programs for small businesses who've fallen behind on their tax payments to the state. Give them some time to catch up. Let them pay their tax bills without any onerous penalties or interest. And additionally, I have a proposal that if employers, schools, churches, or nonprofits hire new workers or give them raises, that I would like to provide a 20% tax credit on the increase in payroll expenses up to $5,000. So if a church wanted to start or expand the daycare, which is also a big issue, they get that 20% tax credit for hiring new people to staff it. Helps to incentivize businesses and expands our workforce.
Mr. Sanders.
There's absolutely no way that the state can afford to pay for even 10% of what my opponent is talking about. The best thing that the state can do is to get out of the way and let us get back to work and get everybody back to work. And that's how this problem is going to be solved. You know, there's not a government solution for everything. And I will mention that my opponent completely forgot to mention that when it comes to repealing Obamacare, about the replacement part. It needs to be repealed and it needs to be replaced. And when it's replaced, pre-existing conditions need to be a part of it. I've never said anything to indicate I'm opposed to having pre-existing conditions. I've never once said anything that I'm in favor of allowing insurance companies to kick people off if they have pre-existing conditions.
Thank you. Next question, please, from the media.
Broadband internet access has been a pretty big necessity as people have been working from home, as schools have been moving to offsite or to hybrid models. What role do you feel that the state government has in expansion of broadband internet access to rural communities and to underserved urban communities?
Mr. Sanders.
This is a great issue, and this is something that I think the state can have a role in. Yes, in the world we live in today, access to broadband is absolutely essential. And what exactly the solutions are for that, I'm not sure, but I will tell you this. I will support anything that is reasonable about expanding broadband. It definitely needs to be a high priority issue.
Mr. Holmquist.
There are plans in place to do that. There are current solutions being worked on. Part of the Kansas Rural Revitalization initiative is specifically a program to bring broadband internet access to rural and outlying communities.
Thank you. Next question from the media, please.
Last year, a bill was introduced in the Ag Committees to give tax relief to farmers who develop carbon sequestration projects. Would you support promoting this type of climate legislation?
Mr. Holmquist.
Absolutely, and many farmers, may I say, including our own operation, already do carbon sequestration by doing practices like no-till and by planting cover crops. Those are incredible incentives that will help us keep and produce a safe and abundant food supply in our state, and a food supply that we need to increase production on as we are exporting those commodities to other states and to other countries overseas. I absolutely support such a program.
Mr. Holmquist. Mr. Sanders.
Could I have the question restated, please?
Yes.
Last year, a bill was introduced in the Ag Committees to give tax relief to farmers who develop carbon sequestration projects. Would you support promoting this type of climate legislation?
I'd have to see exactly what that bill was about. The climate is cyclical. I don't think there's any doubt about that. The climate is cyclical. I'm in favor of giving tax credit, so I could definitely take a look at that and might be able to support that. But the main thing that we need to understand about the climate, it is cyclical. And I don't know what kind of a burden this would put on the farming community, so I don't know.
Thank you. Next question from the media, please.
I live in the 69th district, so both of your names will be on my ballot. Also on my ballot and everybody else's ballot will be the question, should we fund a new jail here in Salina and Saline County? I know on the surface that's not a state issue, but the issue is overcrowding, not just in the Saline County jail, but in jails across our state. At the state level, what can you do to help with that problem?
Mr. Sanders.
Setting guidelines, I think that obviously that there are too many people spending time in jail that are nonviolent offenders, and I think that we should work very hard to eliminate the need that we seem to feel is to send a lot of people to jail who frankly don't need to be there. In fact, we have a local program here in Salina, Surge, which is a restitution program for offenders that might not even involve any jail time. And so I think setting guidelines, a revision of that, so that not so many people are eligible, if you will, for jail.
Mr. Holmquist.
We have to remember that the failed Brownback tax experiment produced cuts to corrections and to law enforcement, and that our police have had to do so much more, like serve as mental health professionals, and sometimes get put in situations where they are under-equipped and undermanned. We have to make sure that we are in a position as a state to provide that kind of funding, as well as we have to, like my opponent says, redo some sentencing guidelines. Most people, as we know, are in jail due to substance abuse, and it would be cheaper to treat them for those addictions rather than create a revolving door in and out of jail.
Thank you. Next question from the media, please.
Barring federal federal aid, what do you feel the state should do to tackle the likely budget shortfall that will be coming next year with the pandemic? And what other revenue sources should it look at to accomplish this, such as legalizing cannabis or legalizing sports betting?
Mr. Holmquist?
Without seeing any year-end revenue numbers and without knowing what relief may or may not come from Congress, it might be irresponsible of me to speculate on such a thing. Revenues have been down, that's true for several months in a row. However, in the month of August, we know that revenues were almost close to normal again. And we are still a long way off from the end of the year. Some of the ways that we can make up revenue is with online sales taxes from online entities, out-of-state entities, medicinal marijuana, and also legalized sports betting.
So we're gonna be somewhere $1 billion in the hole, maybe even more in the hole. And if we fund some of these things that my opponent is talking about, it could approach $2 billion. Yes, legalized sports betting, that should be happening. I don't know necessarily how medicinal marijuana would really aid in the tax hole, but I'm in favor of medicinal marijuana. There are a number of measures that are gonna have to be looked at, but the bottom line is we're gonna have to be cutting spending. And we tend to be addicted to government, and we've got to get ourselves off of that addiction. We've got to be free market, and we've got to let the free market work.
Thank you. Next question from the media, please.
Given the fact that the Oglala Aquifer covers 175,000 square miles and is shared by 8 states, how should the state legislature address the loss of water in the aquifer?
Mr. Sanders.
Well, we need to ensure that we're getting our fair share, and that's been a problem in the past. We know for a fact that Nebraska has, because they're upstream from us, have taken more of the water than they have a right to. Derek Schmidt, our Attorney General, has been great about fighting this, and we have one in court, but we need to make sure that we get the water that's due to us.
Mr. Holmquist.
We need to incentivize no-till crops and dryland crops being planted. Farmers need to do what they need to do, and they need to be able to have successful operations. But the draining of the aquifer is a huge problem.
Thank you. Next question from the media, please.
The state level, how would you address or handle the issue of racism and police brutality? First of all, do you think it's an issue? I know here locally in Salina, there is a movement of sorts for maybe a citizen review board to offer some oversight of the Salina Police Department, but at the state level, do you think that's an issue, a statewide issue, and if so, how would you handle it?
Mr. Holmquist.
First, we must support racial minorities who don't receive the same level of justice that other members of our societies do. We must root out racism wherever it exists, and we must work hard with our law enforcement. But also because of the brown bag cuts, again, as I've said, the police have had to do a lot more, and we have some things that we need to talk about. I think that we can hold law enforcement to a high standard at the same time that we hold them in high regard. And my opponent has lied repeatedly about some of my stances on these issues.
Mr. Sanders.
I don't know that I've commented on any of your stances on these issues. I haven't really brought up a race at all in this campaign. I know we have 3 great black guys running for state legislature, Rashad Young and Willie Dove and Patrick Penn, who I've had the chance to get acquainted with. I would certainly hope that the voters of the districts that they're wanting to serve in vote them into office, because they would be able to bring a perspective that maybe we don't have at this time. I don't like the idea of hate crimes, because that gets into a thought police situation. I mean, a crime's a crime, and it doesn't matter whether it's committed against a white guy or a black guy or an Asian guy or anybody else. Crimes are crimes, and we certainly need to fully support and fund the police, and when we come across bad apples, they need to be removed.
Next question from the media, please.
Many people in Kansas and across the nation see a divided and polarized country right now. If you're elected, how do you plan to bridge this divide in your role as a legislator, and work across the aisle with colleagues that differ from you?
Mr. Sanders.
Well, I'm certainly in favor of working across the aisle when we have some sort of a basic agreement. For example, Ryan here has said that his top priority is what he responded on a questionnaire to the chamber, was that removing the taxes from groceries. I can absolutely support him on that, and I'll be willing to work with anybody in the legislature who wants to remove the sales tax from groceries. Now, we've talked a little bit in back and forth about the abortion issue. I'd like my opponent tonight to say that he would absolutely support the value them both amendment, and that he would stand alone as the only Democrat who would be in favor of trying to get value them both onto a ballot and voted into the state constitution.
I don't know if partisanship is a huge issue, but we have a do-nothing legislature that often spends their time debating resolutions about laws passed in New York State rather than dealing with the problems of Kansans. And I will work with members of both parties to advance legislation that will help working Kansas. And incidentally, Mr. Sanders, you have lied again. You are peddling a stream of lies, and there is, according to your mail, there is no such thing as a post-birth abortion, and I abhor partial birth abortions. And it is so clear that your campaign is so bereft of ideas that can help working people that you just lie. So what you're hiding is that you want to force women who are victims of rape and incest to bear their rapist babies, and your support for the Value Them Both Amendment unequivocally demonstrates this.
Next question from the media, please.
If the Affordable Care Act were to be overturned at the national level, what steps would you take to help remedy this in Kansas?
Mr. Holmquist.
First of all, I don't support overturning the Affordable Care Act, and one of the biggest impediments to entrepreneurship in Kansas and our country is the access to affordable health insurance. If the Attorney General and his supporters, like my opponent, have their way, the court will invalidate the ACA, and everyone with health insurance from the marketplace will find themselves without it, especially those with pre-existing conditions, who will be left out in the cold and facing bankruptcy because of having to pay for those conditions.
Mr. Sanders.
Obamacare needs to be repealed. Obamacare needs to be replaced. Nobody is talking about kicking people off of their insurance if they have a pre-existing condition. Now, if Ryan here is as gung-ho about wanting to pass meaningful legislation about abortion as he says he is, then he needs to pledge tonight to support the Value Them Both Amendment, a constitutional amendment that would give the legislature, if we get approval from the people of Kansas, to make meaningful legislation about abortion. If he doesn't support that, then that means he's not interested in being able to fulfill a role as a legislator, making laws relative to abortion. I ask him to pledge to do that tonight.
Thank you. Next question from the media, please.
We touched just briefly on the topic of marijuana. I want to broach it a little more. We've opened, maybe cracked the window a little bit with some hemp, making it legal for growing some hemp here in Kansas. What are your thoughts on, we discuss medicinal marijuana, but marijuana itself, decriminalizing marijuana in Kansas? Would you be in favor of that?
Mr. Sanders.
I think we've got to take this a step at a time. I do support medicinal marijuana. There's too much evidence that it helps too many people. But before we go into decriminalizing marijuana altogether, I would like to see what the results of medicinal marijuana are.
Decriminalization would be very important especially to those people who are serving sentences in jail who could get out and get treatment instead. And medicinal marijuana, of course, with safety procedures so that people who are under a certain age don't have access to it, and that it is regulated at the state level, I think could be a huge asset to all sorts of people who have certain conditions, such as veterans with PTSD or cancer patients. I would strongly support that.
Next question, please.
What do you believe is the most important issue for people in Salina, and how do you plan to take that issue to the people with you?
Mr. Holmquist.
I have knocked thousands of doors and talked to thousands of people in the last 5 months, 7 days a week, talking to people in the 69th district. And the single biggest issue that they have, that they talk to me about, is health care. And we can solve that issue by expanding Medicaid.
Sanders.
Single biggest thing that we can do is support home rule so that those people who are our city commissioners, our county commissioners, our USD 305 school boards members can make decisions that are pertinent to the city of Salina as the conditions on the ground do.
Thank you. Next question from the media, please.
Well, I am out of questions. I guess I did have one that I thought of in the meantime, although it is more pointed towards a particular candidate. I don't know if that's allowed or if it has to be answered by both.
Both.
Both? Okay, then I'm not questioning.
Okay.
I've heard each of you talk about what is wrong with the other one. Can you tell me something that you admire about your opponent as opposed to what you don't like about your opponent?
Mr. Sanders.
Absolutely. Ryan Holmquist is put his hat in the ring. He's running to be a state representative. He's working very hard. Campaigns are hard, and he's done that. I also know that he is an award-winning music teacher, and I hope that the students at Salina Central get to benefit from his expertise in teaching music during the second semester.
I certainly admire Mr. Sanders' commitment to his community, having served in the media at KSAL, which extends itself out to lots of community events and functions, and many of them for many good causes. And that speaks to his character as a member of our community.
Thank you both, and thank you to Mr. Kirkwood, Mr. Pittenger, and Mr. Rankin. This will conclude our questions from the media, and I'm going to turn it over to my co-moderator, Amy Adams, and she will address the question from the audience. Thank you very much.
So I have several questions that were submitted by the public ahead of time. We'll start with a ground level question. Why are you seeking this office, and what do you hope to accomplish? Let's see, we'll start with Mr. Holmquist.
As I said in my opening statement, I'm running because for too long, families are trying too hard to get by, and they are just barely getting by. And my priorities are eliminating the sales tax on groceries, reducing the cost of child care, getting people health care that can't afford it by expanding Medicaid, and making sure our schools are adequately and fully funded.
Mr. Sanders.
I would like to get value them both on an August ballot. That's certainly something important to me. And again, I call on Mr. Holmquist to commit to joining me in that effort, as I am more than willing to join him in the effort to eliminate sales tax on groceries. But we all have heard about the games they play in Topeka. We had a session that was literally 5 minutes short of being 24 hours, despite the fact that there is a law in the legislature that no session should go past midnight. But of course, when things get going too long, they just suspend that rule. We have got to fix the way we legislate. And I want to get on the rules committee and learn what all the rules are, and then figure out a better way to do the work that Kansans need done at the legislative level more efficiently.
Thank you. We've received several questions about taxes from the community. I will start with a general question. Rank in order what taxes you would cut. We'll start with Mr. Sanders.
Number one, sales tax on groceries. I would cut that. Number two, I would place a lid on how much a property can be valued from 1 year to the next. Now, this ties in directly with property tax because, as we know, property taxes can be a shell game. You can keep the mill levy the same, but you can raise the value. Well, there needs to be something in place that says the value of a piece of property can only go up a certain percentage, 2%, 5%, but not some of these wild swings we see that a property that has had no improvements on it be at one level 1 year and then increase 10, 15, 20% the next year. So I think that we've got to have a lid on how much a property valuation can go up.
Thank you. Mr. Holmquist?
Sales tax is the number one, and eliminating the sales tax on food. That is my primary campaign issue. The second is property taxes. We just have to protect Kansas taxpayers from surprise tax increases. And at the very bottom would be income taxes.
Thank you. One of the most difficult things for working families to find is to find affordable childcare. Do you support a childcare tax credit? And this will go to Mr. Holmquist first.
Absolutely. That's a cornerstone of my campaign. When Brownback bankrupted our state and didn't admit that it didn't work the way he wanted, he made huge cuts, and we lost the child care tax credit that we have. We have gotten it back to some degree. We need to double that child care tax credit because we need to make sure that working families have the ability to get affordable child care so that they can be productive members of our economy, be able to raise money for themselves and provide for their own families and children.
Thank you. Mr. Sanders?
Certainly a child care tax credit is something that needs to be looked at, but the reality of the situation that we're in is we're in a $1 billion plus hole. Maybe closer to $2 billion. So yes, that the child care tax credit is definitely something that in principle I could support, but whether that's going to happen this year, I don't know, because we've got to figure out a way to dig ourselves out of this hole.
All right, thank you. The property tax lid has been discussed in the Kansas Legislature for years. What is your stance on this topic? And we'll begin with Mr. Sanders.
Well, I think I articulated my point of view very clearly earlier, but again, to reiterate, I'm not for property taxes are something that the local governments decide, and they ought to be left to decide that. What I am opposed to is a county appraiser who can just arbitrarily raise the value of a piece of property by way above what the market would bear. And I'm certainly opposed to situations when we have a recent sale that didn't involve a family or a friend, that they come up with some sort of value allegedly based on properties, comparable properties. So there needs to be a lid on how much valuation can be raised.
Thank you. Mr. Holmquist?
I definitely support a property tax lid. Part of my answer to the previous question was that we can get surprise tax increases. And that's not a good thing, especially for when we're talking about farmers and ranchers who own a lot of land and then are not getting their commodities to market, or not getting good prices for them, and all of a sudden they're hit with a tax increase.
Thank you. Do you support eliminating various sales tax exemptions in the state of Kansas to raise revenue? And we'll start with Mr. Holmquist.
I don't like raising a sales tax in any circumstance.
All right, thank you. Mr. Sanders?
I support eliminating sales tax on groceries. That needs to be eliminated.
Do you support expanding the earned income tax credit? Why or why not? And we'll start with Mr. Sanders.
That's something I can support. anything that's, gonna be about reducing taxes is something in principle I'm in favor of. But again, I am very concerned about this, hole that we find ourselves in. And if we start reducing every tax in sight, we'll never dig ourselves out.
Mr. Holmquist?
Yes, we should reward hard work by families who work 2 or 3 jobs trying to raise those families, and the earned income tax credit is a better way to help people escape poverty than simply give them a handout. Rewarding work is always a better way.
Thank you. One last tax question. Consumer trends, especially during COVID, have seen a dramatic rise in internet commerce and sales. This trend is hurting local economies as revenue and taxes from sales don't stay with local businesses and taxing entities. How can the Kansas Legislature assist? Mr. Holmquist.
The Kelly administration has already started charging online sales tax from online entities, and there's already a statute in place that enables that to take place. We cannot let our local businesses die, and we have to support those, and at the same time seeing that Amazon is not paying tax as well. There's something in place now, and we are already seeing revenue from that.
Thank you, Mr. Holmquist. Mr. Sanders?
Amazon is paying taxes. Walmart is paying taxes. I am definitely in support of anybody who does commerce on the internet paying their fair share of taxes, paying the sales taxes that the local stores, whether it be one of the big box stores or whether it be a mom and pop operation, they should all pay the taxes equally. But the fact of the matter is, this is not going to be a panacea in $1 billion plus budget hole. This would maybe account for about $30 million. And while it's good, and while we need to do it, anybody who thinks that this is going to solve our budget problems hasn't studied enough.
Thank you. Moving on to another topic. We've already talked about the Affordable Care Act, but what efforts would you work towards to lower the cost of health care in Kansas? Mr. Sanders?
We need to allow commerce across state lines. We need to allow competition. You know, if there's a company that operates in several states, which there are lots of those kinds of companies here in Kansas, we need to allow their insurance program to be fully funded in the state of Kansas. And if that means that somebody in Kansas is sending a check off, or a company here in Kansas is sending a check off to Georgia or Nevada or wherever, we need to allow it.
Thank you. Mr. Holmquist?
If we are to lower health costs for working people, we need to expand Medicaid. Give people the ability to see a doctor before their health condition becomes an emergency, which will result in better economic outcomes and will save money on costly interventions for those people at a later time.
Moving on to another topic. Are you in favor of raising the minimum wage to $15 per hour? Why or why not? Mr. Holmquist?
I am not in favor of raising the minimum wage to $15. I think a good place for our economy, a good starting place would be $10. But we can also, by expanding the earned income tax credit, that's another way that we can help people who work minimum wage jobs get enough money to make ends meet.
Thank you. Mr. Sanders?
Absolutely not. I'm not in favor of expanding the minimum wage to $15 to $10 or to anything other than what it is now. And the fact of the matter is that it ought to be people who are just starting out in their work careers, who are working in those minimum wage jobs. And if you expand, there's no such thing as just expanding the minimum wage, because if you do that, everybody has to get a raise. And for the life of me, I don't understand why the government has any role being involved in the employer-employee relationship when it comes to wages.
Thank you. Moving to budget. What do you think are the 3 most important items in the annual budget for the state of Kansas? Mr. Sanders?
Well, obviously, education is at the top of the list. I support quality education. I don't support the fact that the court took over the legislator's role and mandated a particular number. But certainly we need quality education, and it needs to be funded. Secondly, transportation. We've got to, that has got to be a budget priority in the state of Kansas. And relative to the a third item, certainly economic incentive to get businesses to relocate in Kansas, like we've had a great success here in Salina recently, is something that I'd be in favor.
Thank you, Mr. Holmquist.
Education is the number one, both public and higher education. And may I remind my opponent that the court took over the role because of over 20 plus years of lawsuits because your party didn't do their job for our kids. Secondly, roads and bridges. And 3, Medicaid. Support our seniors, pregnant women, children, as well as foster care services. We have to remember that the failed Brownback experiment resulted in more than 70 children being completely lost by the state, and we literally did not or do not know their whereabouts because of cuts made to DCF.
Thank you. Staying on the topic of budget, what is your plan to balance the budget in the 2021 session? Mr. Holmquist.
Well, I think we sort of addressed this with the media question already, but I mean, again, without seeing any year-end revenue numbers and without knowing what relief might come, we still don't know. We still don't know what's coming for us. And I think it just would be irresponsible at this point to speculate what's going to happen by January.
Thank you. Mr. Sanders?
So for those who aren't aware, it's a constitutional requirement that the governor of the state of Kansas submit a balanced budget to the legislature, and then the legislature adopts it or changes it or amends it as they see fit. So obviously it starts with the governor, in this case Laura Kelly, to submit a balanced budget, and then we'll see where we go from there. And I'd like to remind Ryan that last I heard, Sam Brownback wasn't on the ballot this time.
Thank you. Please describe your thoughts and ideas towards lessening regulatory burdens on businesses in Kansas. Mr. Sanders.
I'm sorry, again, please.
Sorry. Please describe your thoughts and ideas towards lessening regulatory burdens on businesses in Kansas.
Well, I'm very pro-deregulation. I'm absolutely pro-deregulation. Government needs to get out of the way as much as possible and let the free market do its thing. That's where we thrive.
Thank you, Mr. Holmquist.
Well, as a farmer, I certainly understand the burdens that regulations can have on business, and I understand while some of them are onerous, I appreciate the ability to breathe clean air, drink clean water, and have ourselves a safe and abundant food supply.
Thank you. On to another topic. What statewide changes could alleviate hunger in Kansas, the breadbasket of the world? Mr. Holmquist.
Eliminate the food sales tax. Expand Medicaid and expand child care tax credits. Those 3 things combined together, people will have more money to pay for food.
Thank you. Mr. Sanders?
I agree on number 1, eliminate the food sales tax. But I also think that what we have going here in Salina, a program that was started, I don't know, 30 years ago now, I think, by Jack Parr and at the time Jane Glenn, now Jane Kramer, called Project Salina, that I've been a board member of Project Salina for a long, long time. I'm the past president of Project Salina, where we make an effort here in Salina to raise food for 5 agencies that help feed the hungry: the Emergency Aid Food Bank, the Salvation Army, the Ashby House, the DVAC, and the Salina Rescue Mission. And I've also been involved lately the chairman of the Super Bowl drive here in Salina. And again, these are local initiatives, and we can be a model in the state of Kansas for trying to solve this problem as best we can locally, not involving the government.
Thank you. We're drawing to the end of our time for public questions. So here's your final question for tonight. How do you feel about for-profit jails and prisons
that's something that I think would have to be, looked at and studied. I think certainly protecting the safety of all Kansas citizens is basically the duty of governments at all levels. If they're, as just without any kind of oversight, I wouldn't be in favor of that, but I would be in favor of looking at proposals.
Thank you, Mr. Holmquist.
I oppose for-profits, jails, and prisons.
All right. I will turn it over to my co-moderator for the closing remarks.
Thank you, Amy. We come to that portion of the evening where we're going to allow each candidate to have their closing remarks noted. And at this time, it's a 1 minute closing remark. At this time, we'll go to Mr. Adams. Excuse me, Mr. Holmquist.
My name is Ryan Holmquist. My priorities are eliminating the food sales tax, getting people health care that can't afford it by expanding Medicaid, reducing the cost of child care, and creating jobs for people who've lost them in the pandemic. I will bring empathetic and effective leadership to Topeka, and I ask for your vote on November 3rd.
Thank you, Mr. Holmquist. Mr.
Andrew?
Yes, sorry, Mr. Sanders. I thought I said it.
Uh, My name's Clark Sanders. I'm a conservative Republican. I'm unapologetically 100% pro-life. And again, I ask Mr. Holmquist to tonight pledge to support the values of both amendments. It's the only way he's going to have any opportunity to pass any legislation, meaningful or otherwise, relative to the abortion issue. I am 100% pro-Second Amendment. I'm endorsed by the NRA, and it didn't really come up tonight, but as most of us are aware, Mr. Holmquist recently appeared at an event of Barbara Bollier here in town, and Kansas for Life PAC, so she's perhaps the most pro-abort legislator that's ever served in Kansas. I would also like to remind folks that not once, not twice, but 3 times, my opponent has donated to Bernie Sanders.
Thank you. At this time, I'll pass it back to my co-moderator, Amy Adams, for her closing remarks.
I want to thank my co-moderator and everyone this evening. Thank you to the candidates for joining us and to the viewers who are taking an interest in this race. I want to remind everyone to vote on or before November 3rd. Now we are going to take a short break and we'll return with the candidates from Kansas House District 71. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're smattering of applause.
Gentlemen, appreciate your help tonight.
They are really good. Oh, and we didn't bring any. About sanitizing. Yeah, if I bring any alcohol. Let's talk about that later.
One we got pretty good. Other than that, off. One game
How you doing, Clark? Okay. Small spot, huh? Okay. Good to meet you. Oh, okay. Fancy man. We've got over here. Yeah, I guess.
So that,
Flip the other way. This will go.
You gotta put that on first. So.
And then there's another banner at the top.
Mm-hmm. So all the exhaust goes out the side, so.
That's the other way. The big one on the and then you can put the string in, bottom string underneath the gear. And then
Look now, all I can see is the phone. Yeah, can you give me a quick one? That's 1, 2. That's 1, 2. Give me just a little bit more. Okay, how's that?
Probably about as loud as all.
There we go. That's better. Much better, thank you. Yeah, nobody can see Okay. Is that a full copy? No, it's fine. Go ahead and give me a little read for me.
Testing.
Wonderful, that's what I need. Perfect, thank you. Ann and I have got, we went from 7th grade on, standing in the back of every line, you think of school. In between us was Gen Z. Wow. And ahead of me was still me.
So there'll be women's.
Butterscotch or peppermint? Okay. Well, I'm not a green holder, so. I keep around for green.
Green is, you can go and you've got a minute. That's 10 seconds left. Stop.
Okay, so you hear that green is, you're good to go. You have a minute for a question. Yellow is 10 seconds left, and when it gets to red or pink, they're gonna tell you to stop, and you're also gonna hear the line.
Yeah.
Yep.
I only heard it once before, so I had to go put my time on when I got it.
Yeah, it's nice. It'll wake you up. Not that bad.
That's a problem.
No, not a fire alarm.
Were we starting at 7 or at 7:05?
7:05. That's
Okay.
true. I'm sorry.
All right.
I'm hurrying here.
I'm gonna go, whoa, you gotta hurry. Okay, I'm just gonna demonstrate the alarm. Yeah. No, let me show you.
Not that like that. I only heard it once. I'll just get through that.
Yeah, those guys were really watching. I startled Clark. I know.
You gotta stop that.
Sorry.
I didn't need to be that loud there.
Oh, was it 101 or whatever? I couldn't read. Oh, I'm sure they did. I went. And the only thing that have changed is there's no parking lot in front of the student union And the school is experience much larger now. It used to be, except for the library, Park Valley. Yeah, that's fine.
So which of these cameras is the,
This one right here.
this one and these are?
So straight ahead is, will be focused on you all. We are covering media, and we're covering moderators, and there's another one that flows.
Put it all together.
Yep.
What did they do?
I guess that,
I waited until they started before I went out and put my tie on, but these guys get to drill us first, and then you get to drill us.
how you doing, Tom? Good.
I mean, good choice. Switching, I think I'll be worse at what you do.
Charlie. I don't know who Charles is. I would have known his Charlie.
Sure, Charles. You're rich.
My middle name's Edward, so I get stuff like that all the time.
I used to get that in the fourth grade, we had 5 Jeffs in our class. So I was known by Alan, my middle name.
What's Captain Curtis? My grandfather.
Yeah, that's right. No, I missed that.
How old is your mother?
Oh,
Well, at least I don't clog up in this man.
Well,
Not yet.
you will.
Really?
Not yet.
So she's, I'm 60, I'll be 61 on Saturday, so she's just a couple years younger than me.
I meant to do that, send it down to me, that message the other day, and I just decided until tonight. Had to decide whether I was in the 60s.
Did you get that email from CFL?
What are you, why?
Right. Well, I told them that two people full-time, so I said, if we have an alternative time.
Thanks, and you can
Used to
call
be
me.
Diana Jones. Yeah.
Well, it's hard when I'm teaching.
What time did your plan start?
I'm always say from 7:30 to 3:30.
Normal hours?
Normal hours.
Or after 3:30 would be normal hours.
Right.
Most of my family, I get it.
They could maybe record something.
They could.
Like later in the day or something. Yeah, record it and play it back the next morning.
You can edit out all of it.
Maybe say things you never said.
I was sure they're gonna do that with the media connection, so.
How many mulligans do we get?
Mention.
As many as we get.
Okay, I already started the fog up.
Do the Andy Reid thing, get that stuff and spray it on the thing and
It's a little late now.
Yeah. You kind of do have a little bit of that Andy Reid resemblance.
Thank you. I wish I was as good a coach as he is. One minute.
Had no problem setting. Started with that. I haven't got it, it's kind of low energy, so I got a lot of my battery. But it went down 4% since I started.
Good evening, and welcome to our second session for our Candidates Forum 2020, this Thursday, October the 22nd. I'd like to welcome everybody and those viewing in on the Salina media stream. We appreciate your concern and care for this election that's coming up. I'd like like to introduce myself as James Lambert. I'm the board chair of the 2020 Salina Area Chamber of Commerce. This forum is sponsored by the Salina Area Chamber of Commerce and the League of Women's Voters. It features candidates for Kansas House Representative 71st District. Printed profiles by the Chamber on all the candidates can be found at the Chamber office, on the Chamber's website, which is www.salinakansas.org, the County Clerk's Office, and the Salina Public Library. The candidates also completed questionnaires for the Salina League of Women's Voters. Those are available at the League of Women's Voters website, which is www.lwbsalina.org. I'd also like to thank the candidates and media members for being here this evening and for following our safety protocols as we deal with the COVID-19 issues. This forum is being recorded by the Smoky Hill Public Television for future airings, and it's also in connection with the Salina Media Group. At this time, I'd like to introduce our two candidates this evening. First, Mr. Jeffrey Zammerslaw, and then Mr. Steve Howell from the 71st District. This time I'd like to introduce Amy Adams, my co-moderator, and she will go over the evening's events and rules. Amy, thank you.
Thank you. I will briefly go over the format and the rules for this evening's forum. Each candidate will be allowed a 1-minute opening remark. We will alternate questions between the candidates. First, we will cover questions from our media panel, and then we will move on to submitted questions from the public. Candidates will have 1 minute to answer questions, and then they will each be allowed 1 minute for our closing remark. We will now begin by allowing for 1 minute for an opening remark, starting with Mr. Howell.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for having me out this evening, and thank you to the Salina Area Chamber of Commerce and the Salina League of Women Voters and the Salina Media Connection for making this all possible. Hi, my name is Stephen Howell. I'm a Republican running for House District 71. This is my first time running for public office. I decided to enter into this race because last spring, as I was teaching, and the global pandemic was spreading to the lower 48 of the United States and to Kansas too, I read an article in one of the newspapers that stated that about 2/3 of the state legislature was an at-risk population. And I felt like it was my duty to step up as a younger leader in my community to put my name out there to try to represent the 22,000 people of the 71st District.
Thank you, Mr. Howell. Now an opening comment from Mr. Zammerslaw.
Hi, I as well would like to thank the Chamber of Commerce and the League of Women Voters for inviting us. My name is Jeff Zammerslaw. I was raised in Salina. I'm from Salina. I did move away to join the Marines and then had a long career as a electrician. I'm one of those senior citizens you're talking about. I have been involved with politics for well over 30 years, and it's time for things to change. We need people in our legislature that actually want to find solutions instead of bicker. I'm asking for everybody to vote so that we can get something done.
Thank you. Now back to James for the media questions.
Thank you, Amy. I'd like to at this time thank the media for joining us this evening and take this opportunity to present one of those individuals, Mr. Paul Kirkwood from the Salina Media Connection, Mr. Todd Pittenger from Rocking In Radio, and Mr. Charles Rankin from the Salina Journal. Thanks again to you, all three of you, for being here. And now we will take questions for the media. Who would like to go first?
In the midst of the pandemic, healthcare is a really important issue for Kansas. Oklahoma and Missouri have both in the last year voted to extend Medicaid to their states, which means all 4 surrounding states and Kansas have extended Medicaid. What are your thoughts on the idea of expanding Medicaid in the state, and how can we make healthcare a priority in Kansas?
Mr. Howell, thank you for the question. Yes, Medicaid expansion is definitely a topic of conversation, not only this year, but in previous sessions of the legislature. However, because of the global pandemic, it's upended our economy, as you may know. According to some of the budget experts, they forecasted budget deficits starting in January, when the legislative session would begin, up to $600 million. So I'm not sure, I'm very skeptical about expanding a program that would cost more money. Also, the budget projections show at the end of the fiscal year could be well over $1.2 billion. So I'm very hesitant to say, yes, let's expand the government program, when we might have a lot of trouble affording what we currently have to pay for. So, thank you, Mr. Howell. Mr. Zammerlaw.
It really is an important subject. I'm in favor of expanding Medicaid. Several reasons. One, we're seeing rural hospitals closing because they can no longer keep the doors open because they're just not making enough money. The Affordable Care Act was modeled on economic theory of low profit, high volume, the Walmart model. And the only way that hospitals and doctors can receive enough money is to expand it. And we are leaving billions of dollars on the table that we could be receiving from the federal government for that. The amount that Kansas has to chip in, oh my, I just went blank. I think it's 30%, might be 40. I think we can come up with some numbers though that would allow those hospitals to stay open.
Thank you, Mr. Zammerlaw. Next question from the media, please.
We are now in the 7th month of the COVID-19 pandemic. Data as of yesterday from the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, and this is in terms of new cases and the percent positive test rates, continue to suggest that community spread is still prevalent across Kansas, and now it's really shifting more to rural areas. 2/3 of the new cases are now outside the Kansas City metro area and the Wichita area, which means it's spreading into rural areas of Kansas, the smaller communities. How do you assess the state's response to the pandemic so far? Have we done enough? Have we not done enough? Has it been what we needed to do? What is your assessment of the state's response to the pandemic?
I'll go to you, Mr. Zammerlaw, first.
Okay, where do we start on that one? There's a lot to unpack here in short time. The governor came out and led on this issue when she closed the schools. And I know it put a lot of people in dire straits because she did that. All of a sudden they needed help. They needed somebody to take care of their kids. Well, they were. But when the Legislative Council of Elders, for lack of a better word, overruled her and said that, no, we can't do this way, that put into motion several things that we're seeing play out now. The leading indicators, well, death being one, is behind by 2 weeks. And for every case that's diagnosed, we have 10 cases that are not diagnosed. So all we're seeing is the tip of the iceberg. We've got to do more.
Thank you, Mr. Zammerlaw. Mr. Howell? Yes, we are certainly in unprecedented times. Kansas is no stranger to pandemics. The 1917 pandemic, of course, hit very close to home here. Kansans are resilient. They're strong, and they're capable. We have a lot of great communities across our state, and many people are doing great things to work together to keep not only schools open, but to keep people safe. So I am not one to sit up here and criticize the response by our state government and officials. Could we do more? Yes, perhaps we could, especially the most vulnerable populations of people, the elderly that live in nursing homes. I'm very concerned about their isolation during this global pandemic. So I say we continue to work hard and work together to ensure the safety of all Kansans. Thank you, Mr. Howell. Next question from the media, please.
In the event of a conflict between city ordinances and state legislation. Are you supportive of legislation, state legislation maintaining or overruling local ones?
Mr. Howell. Do you have any specific examples?
I guess the most prominent one now that we're wrestling with is a mask mandate. But
I see. Yeah, thank you for the question. It's very relevant. I do support local control of whether it's education or things like mask mandates. I do believe that the government closest to the people can respond most effectively. So I do support Saline County and the city of Salina having that authority to make those decisions, whether it's a USD 305 school district or it's the county or city commission. So I would support protecting the home rule concept. Thank you, Mr. Howell. Mr. Zammerlaw?
Well, I do support home rule to an extent. As with all things, I think the state should set regulational standards. And then I think that the counties and the cities should refer to those standards and devise their plan from that. I'll let it go at that.
Thank you, Mr. Zammerlaw. Next question from the media, please.
With the pandemic, we can more than likely expect a budget shortfall at the state level. So borrowing some federal aid, what are some revenue sources that you could see help accomplish making up for the shortfall, such as legalizing marijuana or sports betting?
Mr. Zammerlaw, please.
That's funny, you should bring that up. That's one of my favorite topics. I think that we need to completely legalize marijuana and make it retroactive so that the hundreds of thousands of people in the state who have misdemeanor convictions have those annulled. I think that it's an exciting new revenue stream if we look at the states that surround us. I'm not going to say it's a plethora and it's going to fix all of our ails, but it can go a long ways towards it. But the state has to regulate it, has to do the job correctly in order for that to happen.
Thank you, Mr. Zammerlaw. Mr. Howell, did you mention medical marijuana or recreational
I
marijuana?
just said marijuana in general.
Marijuana, okay. Personally, I don't support what is deemed as medical marijuana. However, I am open to having hearings on byproducts of cannabis. I do support industrial production in the state, and it's hard to say if there's a silver bullet that's going to make up for the revenue that we might be facing during the next legislative session. We're going to have to examine the budget line by line to see what the most effective way to do that is. But I think the best thing to do is to try to keep the economy open, keep small businesses open on Main Street, and people employed. I think that's the best thing that we can do to generate revenue in our communities. Thank you, Mr. Howell. Next question from the media, please.
With the pandemic, we've had record numbers of unemployment. I know some people are back on the job now. Initially, at the national level, we did have some help for the unemployed, but that ran out on July 1st. And at the national level, they've not been able to get their heads together to come up with any sort of a plan. At the state level, if anything, what should we do to give a little extra to those who are unemployed right now? Should we give a little extra to those who are unemployed right now?
Mr. Howell. Well, should we? That's a great question. How do we pay for it? You know, is there anything currently in the budget that would allow the governor or the legislature to shift funds from an unused portion to something like that? I don't know. But we definitely can do better in terms of responding to claims that are pending. With technology, we can certainly do that. I think the Secretary of Labor had to step down because it got so bad during this past year. And Kansans deserve better. Kansas workers deserve a better response time on their unemployment claims. And so I think that bureaucratic red tape needs to be improved. And we can do that with technology. Thank you, Mr. Howell. Mr. Zammerlaw.
We have just begun to climb out of the hole that we were put in by the great experiment. Charles Laffer's supply side economic theory. Ronald Reagan implemented it in 1981, 1982, and then reversed it before his first reelection in '84. Sam Brownback decided that it was going to be the great plethora to get businesses going. Well, it didn't work. Instead, he opened the Bank of KDOT and robbed our state transportation network of being able to adequately do what it needed to do. We can give them some money. We've got a new rainy day fund that the governor started. I don't know how much is in it, but I think that we need to look at it.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Mr. Howell. Next question from me, please. Sorry.
The Ogallala Aquifer covers 175,000 square miles and is shared by 8 states. In the event of a water shortage, what should the state legislature do to address it?
Mr. Zammerschwal.
Man, that's a great question. It's been going dry for a long time. I don't have any current data on it, but I know it's been, the level has been sinking on maybe 10, 15 feet per year because of all the draw on it. No-till crops, cover crops would go a long ways towards farmer irrigation, recovery for the aquifer. I'm not sure that we can do anything without having a multi-state compact. There is one in existence right now, however, it's in disarray. We need all of the states that are drawing water from it to step up and take responsibility. Otherwise, we're going to have a huge desert.
Thank you, Mr. Zammerschwal. Mr. Howell. Thank you for the question. We certainly would need more snow to fall in Colorado. Okay, really bad joke. I'm sorry. But basically, you know, you have a lot of snowfall that would come down through the Arkansas River, and we do have a compact with the state of Colorado to have a certain part of that surface water come our way, as we do with Nebraska as well, up on the Republican River. But in terms of groundwater, a lot of that water is used for irrigation and agriculture. It can be used for ethanol plants and all sorts of different industrial applications. We have a set of water rights that are administered in the state, whether it's a junior right or a senior right. So I think we would have to examine the water law in depth a little bit more. And that is one issue that Governor St. Brendan led on, is developing a 50-year water plan. So I'd be interested to see what Governor Howell is doing in response to follow up on that. Thank you, Mr. Howell. Next question from the media, please.
We've seen with people working from home and with education moving to online or hybrid models, and seen that broadband internet access is a key part of that. How do you feel is the state government's job or the state government's role in allowing broadband internet access to rural communities and to underserved urban communities?
Mr. Howell, your response, please. If you look over the last 20 years, there's been millions and millions of dollars by way of the federal government that have come back to the state for the expansion of broadband internet. So I don't know if it's a matter of money. There are a lot of private companies that are also expanding their networks as well across the state. I think the main thing is to keep people in our rural communities, to give them jobs, affordable housing, and opportunities. And broadband is part of that, but I don't know if it's something that you can just throw money at. Because by evidence in the last 10 to 20 years, there's been millions and millions of dollars that have gone into expanding fiber to our rural communities. Thank you, Mr. Howell. Mr. Zammerschwal.
Okay, first, Sam Brownback, he actually wanted the Holcomb power plant, which would have drawn over 1 billion gallons of water from the aquifer each year. I was very opposed to that. You know, I made a lot of money being an electrician on power plants. I am a union electrician, retired. Next, think that we have to step back and take a look at the advantages of having broadband in rural communities. The biggest advantage is the hybrid teaching model that you were just talking about, or distance learning. Faster speeds for people to, for their kids to learn at school in real time. So we've got to expand it. And the government's working on that now.
Thank you, Mr. Zammerfeld. Next question from the media, please.
I live in the 69th district, so unfortunately, neither of your names will be on my ballot.
You could move.
Well, you'd have to clear out my wife first. What is on my ballot and on everyone's ballot is the question of should we build a new jail here in Salina and Saline County because overcrowding. Simply, our jail is too crowded. I know that's a local issue, but in the bigger picture, I'm told that the overcrowding perhaps needs to be handled at the state level. How can you help in the situation with the Saline County Jail, and I guess jails across Kansas in Topeka at the state level?
Mr. Zammerfeld, please.
Well, we could reduce recidivism by legalizing marijuana. And Salina does have a program where we send people into a deferral program if they are willing to go to treatment. That is one thing, but the recidivism, Bill Graves, long ago, decided that the state no longer should be in the mental health care business. And I know much of the recidivism we see in our jail are people who are mentally ill that need medication and can't buy it. So it's a multi-pronged approach. We reduce the jail overcrowding by fewer people, restore Medicaid benefits, and also put the state back in the business of providing mental health.
Thank you, Mr. Zammerfeld. Mr. Howell? Yeah, thank you for the question. I just did I attended a presentation locally by the Saline County Sheriff's Office about the jail expansion project, and I learned that every year $6 million is spent in housing our inmates in other county jails, and that is certainly a problem. That is a huge chunk of change, and so I understand why they are putting this on the ballot for the voters of Saline County to decide. That's a lot of money to spend sending to other counties. I think eventually a project like this would pay for itself. What can the state legislature do to assist counties like Saline County? Well, that is a very good question because a lot of these crimes are committed here in Saline County. So again, going back to the home run or the home rule, that's dealt here locally. There could be some other opportunities to support our corrections officers through some additional funding. Thank you, Mr. Howell. Next question from the media, please.
As you both know, this is a vitally important year because the time of redistricting is upon us. Would you support the formation of a non-partisan district reorganizing committee rather than gerrymandering new districts in the upcoming legislative sessions?
Mr. Howell? I do not support a non-partisan commission. What do you mean by non-partisan? Some people define that differently, but it is the constitutional responsibility of the state legislature to work on redistricting. It's unfortunate that last time the legislature was afforded that opportunity, they really kicked the can down the road. Unfortunately, some federal judges had to get involved because they didn't meet their deadlines, and they redrew some of the districts. At the time, I was working for a U.S. congressman, and there was all sorts of wild ideas coming from out of state of how we should redraw or gerrymander districts. I do not support gerrymandering for political gain. This is something that we need to work on together to ensure that each person has representation. Thank you, Mr. Howell. Mr. Zammerfeld?
It's difficult not to say, yeah. I do support the mission. My problem is when you elect people to government that distrust government, you get a government you distrust. That's what we have now is a government we distrust in general. There's been so many people, media people, TV, one network in particular I won't mention, that have done nothing but want to strangle government in the bathtub. Long ago, there was a guy by the name of Arthur Dean who wrote a report for FDR in 1933 who said, we don't want a government that's truncated, we just want one that works. The only way for this to work is to have an independent commission that makes every district competitive.
Thank you, Mr. Zammerswell. Next question from the media, please.
We see many people in Kansas and across the nation as divided and polarized in some ways. If you're elected, how do you plan to bridge some of that divide in your role as a legislator and work across the aisle with colleagues that differ from you?
Mr. Zammerswell, we'll go to you first on that.
Probably the most difficult relationship I've ever had was with Brenda Landworth. She proposed an ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council, bill many years in a row called TABOR. We saw what TABOR could do in Colorado. TABOR is the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. And what it does is it ratchets down the amount of revenue the state can pull in every year. Well, about 20 years ago, we saw that Colorado, their roads were crumbling because they could no longer afford to do it. And it's a constitutional amendment. So every year now, Colorado has to pass a new law and have it approved by 2/3 vote to fund their infrastructure. I got along with it. It took some time. We found some common ground, but we did get along.
Thank you, Mr. Zammerswell. Mr. Howell? If elected to the Kansas Legislature, by statute, we are required to work together to pass the budget. And so I am eager, if elected, to represent the great people of the 71st District in a bipartisan way. I don't represent 5,000 or 16,000, it's 22,000. Whether they're a toddler, a teenager, or someone that's retired, I will try to do my best to represent all people at all ages and work to find common ground. One area of common ground that we could work on would be to look for ways to lower our utility rates in our state, to make Kansas more competitive, to attract good jobs, and to keep and retain good jobs that we currently have. Thank you, Mr. Howell. I think we have time for one more question from the media panel.
We mentioned a $1 billion debt is what the state will be facing here when the new budget comes out. $1 billion. You mentioned legalizing marijuana. What are some other ideas, revenue sources? What are some ideas you have to deal with that $1 billion deficit?
Mr. Howell? So if you look at every dollar that the state of Kansas collects, 63 cents of every dollar goes to K-12 education and higher education. 28 cents of every dollar goes towards Medicaid and social services. That leaves less than 10 cents per dollar for everything else. So budgets are pretty tight. A lot of things are already spoken for in our state budget. So, in terms of looking for more revenue, I don't believe that we should legalize more controlled substances to raise revenue. I don't believe in expanding casinos or gaming because I'm not sure that really creates wealth. We need to produce things, to manufacture things, and to export those to the global marketplace. Thank you, Mr. Howell. Mr. Zammerswell?
Well, we do agree that we do need to create wealth, and the way to do that is by creating jobs. The service industry doesn't create jobs. It services people that come through tourism, hotels. Like the lead sled, which we missed this year, which I dearly missed, that brings in a lot of money, but it's only one event. Manufacturing jobs, Salina had some success. Some of the other cities around the state have had some success as well. However, as manufacturers have fled the United States for cheaper pastures, we're faced with a dilemma. How do we create jobs and good paying jobs with people that don't wanna hire you? I don't have an answer, but I'm willing to listen to somebody that does.
Thank you, Mr. Zemmersloff. So that concludes our questions from the media panel today, or this evening, and now I'm going to turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Amy Adams, to address some questions from the audience.
Thank you.
Thank you. The questions I will be asking you tonight were submitted by the public prior to tonight's forum. So we'll start with a really foundational question. Why are you seeking this office, and what do you hope to accomplish? And we'll start with Mr. Zemmersloff.
I'm seeking this office because we need a legislature that works with the government. We don't need an adversarial relationship with Laura Kelly. We need a relationship of mutual trust and benefit for the entire state. Most Kansans realize that there are 5 counties in this state that can elect anyone to statewide office, whether it be federal or state office. I'd like to see Salina and other rural communities be able to have more influence.
Thank you. Mr. Howell?
Yes, thank you. Hi, I'm Stephen Howell, running for House District 71, and I appreciate the live stream audience that is out there. I can't see you, but I know you're there, and again, appreciate the opportunity. This is the first time I'm running for public office. I'm a husband, a father of 4 boys, a small business owner here in Salina, which we've had in operation in downtown Salina for 13 years. I got into this race because, based on my years of experience of working for 2 different members of Congress, and focusing on constituent services. And constituent services that work with farmers, veterans, small business owners, people at their wits' end with their government. They turned to our office and they gave me a call, and I worked to help them out. So I want to bring a level of service, a servant leadership to the office, and I would appreciate your vote.
Thank you. Several of the questions we received were about taxes. So let's start with a really general question. Could you rank and order what taxes you would cut? And we'll start with Mr. Howell.
Thank you. I have signed a pledge, the Taxpayer Protection Act. I have pledged not to raise taxes on hardworking Kansans or any Kansans, whether they're on a fixed income or they're just out of college with their first job. I will not raise taxes. I think there is one area that we can definitely work both sides across the aisle on, and that's the sales tax on food. I know that is something the governor had mentioned when she first ran for office, and I would certainly welcome the opportunity to look at that particular tax.
Thank you. Mr. Zemmersloff?
Well, food sales tax, I agree on that. That needs to be done away with, but property taxes are crazy. One of the big reasons I moved back to Salina from Topeka when I retired is because property taxes in Salina or Saline County are half what they are in Topeka, and they're still high. We need to quit relying on property owners to fund the state. If that means that we need to revisit depreciation on machinery for manufacturers, or I'm sorry, even some farm machinery. When I was a kid, when we farmed, we didn't have a tractor with the air conditioner in it and a radio. We sat out there and sweat all day on it. We bucked bales. We had all the kids from the family, all my cousins and myself were out there bucking bales all day too. So I think that there are revenue streams that we have priced ourselves out of.
Thank you. One of the most difficult things for working families is to find affordable child care. Do you support a child care tax credit? We'll start with Mr. Zemmersloff.
Yes, I do support. I think that unless we can actually create a living, working wage, then we need to give all the help we can to Kansans who are just trying to get by.
Thank you. Mr. Howell?
Would this be in addition to the federal child to the tax credits at the state level?
I'm assuming.
Okay. I would certainly welcome the discussion and have hearings on this to see, different proposals. I would certainly welcome the opportunity to support Kansas families. I want to encourage life. I want to, see our future generations thrive and succeed. And Salina's been fortunate to have some very generous people step into the child care sector to support it. And so I'm very thankful to see that here in this community, a very generous community. But can we do that on the state level in terms of our tax code? I'm open to looking at that to see the devil's in the details as most legislation is.
Thank you. Do you support eliminating various sales tax exemptions in the state of Kansas to raise revenue? And now I'll wish you, Mr. Howell.
Sales tax exemptions, certainly they discussed that years back. We could certainly do the same thing. Fairly general question. There's a lot of different exemptions. It'd be interesting to see the questioner to see if they had something more specific to that. But I can't really comment more than that. Just to say I'm open to having hearings on that. But again, projected shortfalls of up to $600 million at the beginning of the legislative session, up to $1.2 billion at the end of the fiscal year. So I'm not sure that would be possible, but I'm certainly open to having discussions about that.
Thank you, Mr. Howell. Mr. Zamerslaw?
Sales tax exemptions, the ones that I've seen are usually on major purchases. When a business, when I used to write requests for information from people that would come in and build machinery for us. A lot of times the company that we were doing the work for would seek tax exemptions to help them be able to install machinery. It's a spider web. It's almost like the Coke Industries. They're into everything. And I'm not sure how we can do that. I'm not. I'm willing to listen, but I don't have an answer for that.
Thank you. Moving on. Do you support expanding the earned income tax credit? Why or why not? And to you, Mr. Zamerslaw.
I do support it, but I think it needs to be done incrementally. I think that maybe it's by 0.5% or 1% per year over a few years until we find a level where it's actually kept up with inflation. So yeah, I do support it.
Thank you. Mr. Howell?
So tonight we've had a little bit of a discussion about revenue shortfalls, and on the other hand, we're talking about certain tax credits for various entities or sales tax exemptions. It's part of a bigger picture, and so I'm definitely open to discussing these things, but again, it's in the details. We really need to get some better numbers and data to make those decisions on. So I certainly would welcome a vibrant discussion on that. It's been unique and a unique election year in a very unordinary year in itself. So wearing these things makes communication a little bit more difficult. But I do think we need a little bit more of this opportunity, especially for the people out there watching. And I think we could have some cordial discussions, and I think we could make some headway. So.
Thank you. Moving on to a different topic. Do you support the current efforts of Kansas Attorney General Derek Smith to overturn the Affordable Care Act and eliminate pre-existing condition coverage? To you, Mr. Howell.
I saw that question in advance, but are you specifically talking about a lawsuit, or what are they talking about? Do you know?
I'm not certain of the details.
Okay. Well, so I don't know if it's referring to if there's current litigation that the Attorney General is a part of. If he is, I am not aware of it. So I can't comment on that.
Thank you. Mr. Zamerslaw, any comment?
Oh, sure. Derek Smith's part of a 20-some states and the federal government who are in front of the Supreme Court 1 week after the election to overturn the ACA, and that in turn will do away with pre-existing condition coverage. I am not in favor of the ACA the way it is now. Again, it's the Walmart economic theory. I think we can expand it to do a much better job, but that's at the federal level. What the state can do for now is to try to cover people with pre-existing conditions and not try to kick people off. Because right now, I forget how many people have tested positive again. 98,000 some now, I think, have tested positive for COVID. They have a pre-existing condition now.
Thank you. Talking about healthcare more generally, what efforts would you work towards to lower the cost of healthcare in Kansas, Mr. Zamerslaw?
One thing is, I'm a disabled vet, okay? I get most of my medications through the VA system. They negotiate for cheaper prices. Why can't Kansas do that? The insurance commissioner, Vicki Schmidt, is a pharmacist. I know her. She's a lovely person. We used to be neighbors. And she thinks it's a great idea too, to negotiate better prices. But again, unless there is some state framework, like Medicaid expansion, there's nothing she can do.
Thank you. Mr. Howell?
Right now, we don't have a free market economy in healthcare. Not really. I mean, a lot of the prices are negotiated behind some sort of a framework of government bureaucracy and hospitals and insurance companies. I want to empower consumers to have more understanding of each dollar they spend on healthcare. And so I would look for different solutions to do that, to empower consumers, regardless of their insurance status, to be able to afford more services in their community.
Thank you. Please discuss the responsibility of an elected representative to vote on legislation based on what the constituents want, even if the representative personally would not be in favor of the legislation. Mr. Howell?
All right. So I find that kind of a strange question in a way. You know, if I've got 100 people knocking on my door saying, we need to legalize marijuana, and I don't personally have that same conviction, what do I do? Do I go along with what they want? Or do I hold on to my personal conviction? So that is definitely a kind of a quandary, and I haven't been elected to public office yet, so I haven't faced that scenario. So, you know, I think at the end of the day, you have to be willing to vote your conscience. And if that costs you an election, then so be it.
Thank you, Mr. Howell. Mr. Zamerslaw?
Boy, I wish the Washington DC would vote their conscience. That would be great. I don't have a problem letting people know where I stand on an issue. If that's not what you want for that issue, don't vote for me. Don't send me to do your work if your work and my work aren't the same. If we do agree on 80% or 90% of the issues, then vote for me. We can work out the other 10 or 20%. I'm open for discussion, always.
Thank you. Moving to the budget. What do you think are the three most important items in the annual budget for the state of Kansas, Mr. Zamerslaw?
Oh boy, I even wrote that down. Education, regulation, and revenue streams. We need new revenue streams because the ones we have aren't going to get us out of the hole we're in. Whether that's some fancy accounting, the Bank of KDOT, Laura Kelly says she's not going to use anymore. Thank you. Regulations, I know that there are a number of regulations that are on us. At one time, I'm sure they made perfect sense. Now they don't. Sam Brownback did one thing in the state, that he started the office of the, what was his name? He went back and looked at regulations and things and did away with ones that didn't make sense. I think they're still doing that. That's not a bad idea. But we do need to make sure that we give our kids and young adults an adequate education at the price they can afford.
Thank you, Mr. Zamerslaw. Mr. Howell?
Yes, the three most important things, is that how it was referenced in that question? Well, if you look at the current, budget, as it is, 63 cents of every dollar goes to K-12 and higher education, and 28 cents of every dollar goes towards Medicaid and our social services. So I would say those three things are the most important things, in our budget. And those are the three things that we might have the most difficulty coming to some sort of a compromise in terms of a budget for this next legislative year. But I am I would welcome the opportunity to have that discussion in a very civil manner.
Thank you. Raising the minimum wage to $15 per hour, why or why not? To you, Mr. Howell.
I do not support raising the minimum wage to $15 per hour. I don't think the federal government or the state government should be involved in setting a base wage for everybody. I think the free market economy is the best way to regulate itself in different communities. There's different costs of living all across the United States. There's different costs of living here in our state of Kansas. So I think the best way to do that is through free market economies and to kind of let things work themselves out.
Thank you, Mr. Howell. And to you, Mr. Zamerslaw.
Well, I am in favor of it, incrementally again. I think that, I know some people maybe not remember, but our previous federal increases in minimum wage were incremental. There's no reason why we can't do that now. Being a retired union member, I retired fairly comfortably. The reason for that is because the union mantra is, together we stand, divided we fall. When employers have all the power over the employees, the employer takes the lion's share, and employees don't get a fair share.
Thank you. Can the Kansas Legislature assist Can the Kansas Legislature assist in inclusion and diversity efforts in Kansas? If so, how? To you, Mr. Zamerslaw.
First of all, we need to codify LGBTQ protections. This business of one governor writing a executive order where they're protected, and then the next governor doing away with that protection, and then the next governor giving them back. That's nuts. Let's just do it. It's actually probably better for us as a state to be more inclusive, to not discriminate, and I think the state can go a long way by just qualifying.
Thank you, Mr. Zamerslaw. And to you, Mr. Howell.
Going back to the previous question, I just want to make a comment regarding the minimum wage. I believe the minimum wage can be dangerous in the unintended consequences. When minimum wages are raised, it often puts teenagers or new people entering the workforce out of the way. We need to really get young people and give them opportunities to work, to give them opportunities to grow, so they can move on and earn a living and to do great things. It's amazing about the amount of teenagers in this area that I've talked to that actually have jobs and full jobs to help support their family. Maybe they have a single mother or something like that, and so that extra income definitely helps. So I would be hesitant about doing that because it can put them in a very tough situation, and I want them to be able to have jobs.
Thank you. We are coming to the end of our time for our public questions, so this will be your last question. What statewide changes could alleviate hunger in Kansas, the breadbasket of the world? To you, Mr. Howell.
Okay, so I saw that question. It's what can alleviate hunger in the world?
In Kansas.
In Kansas. Okay. Well, one of the first things I did when I filed running for public office was to take a tour of the Salina Emergency Area Food Bank. And what great things they do there. They really do. It's really truly a ministry of what they do there. They don't receive any state or federal taxpayer money. This is all through private citizens organizing, being generous of their of what they have, and being good stewards in their community. So I think it is certainly a model that could be, if we can project that story of what is being done here to other communities, I think that's a great model. Of course, there's a lot of foodstuffs that are produced here in Kansas, whether it's livestock or grains and things like that. So there's an abundance here that we can hopefully share with not only those in our community, but our state and the world.
Thank you, Mr. Howell. And to you, Mr. Zammerslaw.
Thanks for waiting just one last time. My first job was 11 years old. I bus tables in a restaurant for 25 cents an hour, so I know what those jobs are like. In high school, I held 3 jobs at one time. What we can do to help alleviate the hunger in Kansas, how's about lowering fees on state and county services? Sam Brownback wanted to make Kansas more like Texas. Texas is a state where you pay for everything separately. State fees have gotten outrageous. County fees for registering a car, doing business with the county, it's just crazy. We can lower those fees and then do away with the food sales tax. It'd be big parts of it.
Thank you. And I'll turn it over to my co-moderator.
Thank you, Amy. We've come to the time this evening where we are going to allow each of our candidates 1 minute for their closing remarks. So we will go to Mr. Zammerslaw first.
Well, my name is Jeff Zammerslaw. It's spelled Z as zebra, A, M as Michael, R, Z as zebra, L, A. Remember that because I want you to look at that name when you go into the voting booth, and I want you to vote for me because my interests lie with the people who need to have a voice. I want to be your servant and work for you to make Salina a better place to live. Not that it's bad now, but it can always be better. So please get out and vote for Jeffrey A. Zammerslaw.
Thank you, Mr. Zammerslaw. Mr. Howell, it's your turn.
Thank you. Again, my name is Stephen Howell. Thank you to all the viewers who tuned in. Thank you to the Salina League of Women Voters and the Salina Area Chamber of Commerce for media panel, Salina Media Connection for putting this together. My name is Stephen Howell. I'm a husband. I'm a father of 4 boys, a small business owner, and I'm a full-time teacher at a private school here in Salina. I teach grade 5 and 6 humanities. During this election, I signed the Taxpayer Protection Act because I believe you need to keep more of your own tax money. I pledge not to raise taxes. I've also signed a pledge to support a resolution enacting term limits on members of Congress. I've been endorsed by the National Federation of Independent Businesses. I've been endorsed by the Kansas Farm Bureau, the Kansas Livestock Association, the Kansas Chamber of Commerce, and Kansas for Life. I would appreciate your trust and your vote in this year's election. Thank you again, and God bless.
Thank you both. Thank you to the media, and thanks for allowing me to be a part of your evening. I'm going to turn it over to Amy for closing remarks.
I would like to thank my co-moderator, James, our panel of media questioners. Thank you to the candidates for participating tonight, and thank you to the viewers for your interest in this election. Remember to vote before or on November 3rd, and have a good night.
Hey, you did a good job on the interview. I followed your upset. Did you see our review? I think it's 4 times a day. I'm not sure.